This is the third of the Burgundy tastings that we have hosted so far this year. The point of these has been to try to replicate or give some semblance of Burgundy Week and the much larger tastings that we normally are hosting at this time of year, where, you know, we'd have 100, 150 of you in a room, probably at least twice, and then a smaller couple of tastings. The idea being to show off the barrel samples of the recent vintage, in this instance 2019, which we are selling en primeur. Now that obviously hasn't happened this year for obvious reasons. So this is our attempt to give you a little taster of some of the most significant wines, some of the sort of benchmark wines from some of our key growers. And we started with Trailblazers last week, and we'll be repeating that on the 21st. So for anyone who is free on the 21st and hasn't signed up to that and didn't come to last week's Trailblazers tasting, do, because those are really the absolute top of the tree wines that we have in our portfolio. A number of you were here with us on Tuesday for our Stalwarts tasting, where we really focused in on, you know, those producers which perennially we go to every single year because they're so dependable, they're so exciting, they just keep making great wines. And tonight we have the third of our three tastings, which is Challengers. So these are growers and wines from growers who are really upsetting the apple cart. You know, they are either new kids on the block, or slightly under the radar, or just amazing value, wines which will surprise you. I think that's kind of the element this evening is these shouldn't be names that you know really, really well. This would be a bit of a surprise. And, you know, these are all wines where if you're sort of starting to think about collecting Burgundy, if you're expanding a cellar, if you want some of the, I'd say, more attractively priced wines from Burgundy, then this is our benchmarks for this sort of level. So good. We'll kick off with the Chablis, or you will at least. So this is a producer who, well, no, first of all, Chablis, and specifically Chablis in 2019. Because, again, apologies for those who were here the previous sessions, but for those who weren't, just a very quick précis of the vintage. 19 we know is great for reds, and we knew was going to be great for reds back in 19 at the tail end of when trying the barrel samples fresh from the malolactic, and you know that they were always going to be great. There was some concern over 19s because it was such a hot vintage with some serious heat spikes and some alcohol levels which were kind of up there with 2003. And even the producers, the growers themselves, were remarkably impressed and delighted when 7 or 8 months down the line, sort of from July, August, September time last year, it clearly showed that the whites were absolutely fantastic too. And despite the richness, despite the density, despite the power and matière of the wines, there was this extraordinary freshness and intensity and tension as well, which is what led me to suggest that I can't recall a vintage which has been as even-handed in its quality to reds and whites since 2010. Chablis, gosh, always an interesting region because it is at once the most overrated and yet underrated of all Burgundy regions. And I say that because for an awful lot of us growing up, you know, Chablis was the go-to Burgundy. It's the go-to sort of fine wine without it ever necessarily being all that fine. And, you can pick up a cheap supermarket brand label or negociant bottle of Chablis for next to nothing. And it's really not terribly exciting. And what makes Chablis exciting is the amount of chalk in the soil and this Kimmeridgian clay, chalk-rich Kimmeridgian clay. And where you get this is where you get exciting wines. And this is why I say both underrated and overrated, because overrated at the basic end. You trade on the name, and it's not terribly exciting. Underrated because most Burgundy lovers tend to think that they're far too grown up and smart for Chablis and graduate beyond it, which is a real shame, because at the Premier Cru and Grand Cru level, Chablis with 5 to 7 years age is about the best value, most satisfying white Burgundy you'll ever drink. And if you look at this, we're starting with the Vaillons, and this is £123 a case of 6. For an amazing Premier Cru Chablis, from a very clay-rich part of the Vaillons vineyard, and it's terrific. It's really lovely. Now you are drinking the 18, which was the first in these 3 solar vintages, 18, 19, 20, and I think I'm glad you are, because the 17, which is arguably a better vintage, a more clean, classic, delineated vintage, is a little closed down right now. Whereas 18 has plenty of the same joie de vivre that 19 has. Although if you're trying the 18 and thinking, gosh, that's quite forward for a Chablis, then I think 19 is quite a good combination between 17's structure and tension and 18's richness and power. So yeah, it's a pretty impressive wine. Long-Depaquit is one of the domains that forms part of the Bichot Maison, but is very much independent, has its own winemaker, etc., etc. And I think we've included it in the Challenger tasting because, firstly, Chablis does deserve your attention, and it is challenging for prominence and a place in your cellar. But also, Long-Depaquit is exceptionally good value year after year after year. Gets wonderful reviews, great scores, lots of critical acclaim, and yet remains a little bit under the radar. So I think it's always worth having a case of Chablis tucked away, and I think the Vaillons from 19 was absolutely terrific. We've also put, and I think Charlie sent it to you or sent you the link. We've got our Burgundy Matrix. So again, apologies for those of you who've been on previous sessions, but for those who haven't, just to let you know, so our Burgundy Matrix, to further attempt to replicate our normal Burgundy En Primeur tastings, what we've done is we've put together, as well as these selections of specific wines, we have added around that wines which you should consider for various reasons. So for example, with this particular wine, we've got an upgrade option. If you like it, but you've got more to spend, then the Vaudezire Grand Cru from Long-Depaquit is everything like this, but slightly more and slightly better and slightly more expensive. If you like this but want to spend a bit less money, then even the Village Chablis from Long-Depaquit is exceptional. And it's sort of 72 pounds for 6 in Bonn. Really? No. Well, that's what it says here, but I'll wait till someone corrects me, but apparently that's how much it is. So there you go.
For which one, Tom?
For the Village Chablis.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, there you go. So perfect. Okay. Great. God. Right. Okay.
Don't buy before I change the price.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't buy too much of that, or we'll never make any money. That's
Tom, you didn't tell them that I had the punishment of having all the Chablis to taste.
Exactly.
I hate Chablis.
Richly deserved. Yeah.
I don't hate Chablis. I'm just like Tom said. I feel like I prefer Chassagne-Montrachet and Meursault.
You're a wine snob. You've outgrown Chablis. You won't.
I'm not a snob. I'm not a snob, but I just prefer the richer tones. But having said that, so basically they sent me all of the 2019s to taste as a punishment, and actually the 19s are really rather good because they've got a steeliness, but also a vivacity. It's really very nice.
Yeah, they've got a bit more pizzazz to them than the 18 that you're drinking, which is lovely, but the 19s just have a bit more of that kind of steely chalkiness. The one wine I did want to mention before we hurtle on is the alternative wine. So in a very similar price bracket, this is 126 for 6. I would massively encourage you to try François Raquiet's Mercure Premier Cru Vélize. So we're going right from the northern part of Burgundy. I mean, we're practically in the Loire. We're closer to Sancerre than we are really to Dijon or Beaune. But right down in the south is the Chalonnais, and we couldn't crowbar Francois wines into these tastings, but my God, they're sensational. So if you want to look out for one of my absolute hidden gems, and we have a nice video on hidden gems, which I know some of you have seen, Ollie, thank you, and others, then watch out for the hidden gems video, because we have Raquier in there from the Chalonnais, and that Premier Cru Velise is stunning, absolutely stunning. Good. Okay, so hurtling on, let's move on to our next wine, which is going to be number 3, I think, the Chassagne-Montrachet. Here we go. Brilliant. Thanks, Nathan, for popping that in. Good.
I'm still sober.
You're still sober. Excellent. One of us is. Marvelous. Now, this should be really interesting for you to try, because you know, we could have chosen 17, we could have chosen 18 for you to try to make comments about the 19 vintage. I mentioned on Tuesday for our stalwarts tasting, when we were doing another of Philippe's wines, you know, what benchmark Chassans he makes. And so we're doing his benchmark Chassin. And I was hugely impressed by the village Chassin this year. I think it drinks at a level above its village level. It's from 15 plots all around the village, mostly though in the center and on the Pouligny side. He uses 25% new oak, but the key thing here is it's big barrels. It's 500-liter barrels, so you don't get a big oaky influence. And Emmanuel, and I think I mentioned this the other evening, so apologies, but I'll say it again because it's important, said that what was really impressive about 19 was that it had the matière, this richness, and the intensity of 14, this incredible vintage, the best since 02, but clearly the character and style of a riper, warmer year like 15 or 18 combined. And I think what you end up with the 19 is a very exciting Chassagne-Montrachet. So the 17 you have now will be on the slightly leaner, more acid style. The 19 has this structure, it has this acidity, but it's overlaid by slightly riper, warmer fruit, slightly richer, more textured wine. And I thought it was absolutely terrific, the Chassagne in 19. You know, it's well, when we come on to our Burgundy Matrix, I'm going to say something almost blasphemous, or something I never thought I'd say, not in the last few years, but we'll come on to that in a bit. I think sticking with Chassagne for now, you know, Chassagne's time is very much now. If you look at Meursault, Pouligny-Montrachet, and Chassagne, perennially, or at least in the past, Chassagne has been the kind of I don't know, the junior partner of the trio, shall we say. And now, you know, with the various Maurice, the various Colins, and one or two other families who finally get a look in, you know, Chassagne is making stunning wines. And, you know, there's a freshness there, but there's an intensity, there's a depth of flavor, there's old vines, you know, you're really getting proper Burgundy. And even at this village level, although I think this outperforms a village level Chassagne, as good as the 19 is straight off the bat, it's definitely worth putting away for, you know, 2, 3, 4 years plus, because it just kind of, it softens into its style and character. More richness develops over time, and more secondary character develops, and there's enough, you know, character and quality in the wine that it is all there. So I always find it a struggle with village level wines not to drink them too young. But even with Bourgogne AOC, I've had Bourgogne AOC, which has been 10, 15 years old and has been stunning. I don't have the patience to wait that long for village level wines, but at the very least, it's worth buying more than you can drink in the next 5 years, because you'll want to enjoy at least a case after the 5 years, frankly. It's my top buying tip. In terms of, oh, sorry, actually, before we go on, I realized there was a question there. Oops, hang on, where's it gone? From David about, apart from the lack of Premier Crus, what's the difference between Chablis and Petit Chablis? So David, it's a fair question. Petit Chablis, as the name suggests, comes in slightly smaller bottles. It's like 50 cls. That's not true. That's not true at all. No, sorry. No. So Petit Chablis is so named because it comes from. I was wondering how long I could get away with that. No, so Petit Chablis comes from vineyard areas that are terrible joke, sorry, which are around and interspersed, almost sometimes intermingled with Chablis designated vineyards. But the idea is that back in the days, they simply weren't considered to have the same depth of Kimmeridgian clay in the soil to allow them to be called Chablis. Now, it's quite interesting because there's a couple of producers, someone else we work with, whose name will come back to me at some point, we haven't worked with him this year, who swears blind that if you do any geological study, there's as much, if not more, Kimmeridgian clay underneath his vineyards in Petit Chablis than there is in many growers' actual Chablis. And he thinks it's a travesty that he has to label his wine Petit Chablis when in fact it should be a Chablis. But it's basically to do with the powers that be officially demarcating vineyards according to the depth and richness of the Kimmeridgian clay in the soil. It's not actually De Fay, no, it's the other chap with the green label.
Domaine des Arts.
Domaine des Arts, there we go, not des Arts, Domaine des Arts. So yeah, so you know, Petit Chablis again can be disastrous. It can be the cheapest of the cheap and the least exciting. But again, if you know your geography, which it so pays to do so in Burgundy, then forget the label and look at, you know, frankly, what's underneath the vines. Anyway, good. So I wanted to mention a few other wines around the Chassagne-Montrachet specifically. So the obvious upgrade is to one of Philippe's Premier Crus. We tried one 2 nights ago, and these represent stunningly good value. You're still under £300 for a case of 6, and you're getting, you know, incredible Premier Cru level fruit. I do think that the Maltroit is always our favorite. You know, it's just a very, it's a beautiful wine. It's balanced, but it's quite rich. It's got a bit of kind of Meursault swagger about it. I always think of it as being, you know, if you think of the Musketeers, it would be Porthos, you know, it's the big one, you know, it's got the broad shoulders. However, in 19, it was unusually racy and elegant, which means I think it's going to have a lot of longevity. So if you want to keep your Chassagne for longer and you want to pay a bit more, then the Maltroit, right in the center of the village, is one to go for certain. As a value option, I was bowled over by our tasting with Edouard Delaunay up in the Haute Côte, where we tried everything from his Bourgogne Aligoté right the way through to his Chambertin. Everything was stunning and everything was very, very true to the terroir. And Saint-Romain, his Saint-Romain is fabulous. And, you know, Saint-Romain is another of those under the radar appellations, which, you know, you don't hear about, you don't think about, but when you try, you remember. And, you know, his Saint-Romain, £138 for a case of 6, is stunning white Burgundy. I think we've just put in a request to get some magnums of that, because that's a brilliant sort of dinner party Burgundy. When you're next hosting more than, well, 2 people, you know, and not outside in a park, then, you know, I don't think magnums are great park picnic wines necessarily, but maybe they are, frankly, even in January. But, you know, that would be a brilliant one to go for, in fact. Really delicious. And Saint-Romain, the way the vineyards are situated, once again benefiting from this increasingly warm weather, getting proper ripe fruit. But the vineyard tends to be very, very stony in Saint-Romain. So lots of white stones, which gives you good drainage, but also reflects the heat. So you get good ripeness now, even if it's not the most well exposed of sites. And then, yes, I said I was going to be blasphemous. So as an alternative, we've struggled, to be perfectly honest. We've struggled in the last couple of years to get terribly excited by Puligny-Montrachet. I think a lot of Puligny has rested on its laurels. A lot of producers, they trade on the name in the same way that Chablis does, but for 3 times the price. And, we've found some great Pulignys from Meursault and Chassagne and other producers, but, we've struggled to find a Puligny producer to get behind. And this year we got our first allocations of Jean-Marc Boyau. And Boyau was one of the very first, in fact, Boyau's Puligny-Montrachet Premier Cru Refaire was the first, 1996, was back in 2000 when I started in the wine trade. It was the first white Burgundy I tried, which made me kind of think differently about wine, certainly white wine, definitely white wine. This was, stunning. So it was a real pleasure to start getting allocations this year from Jean-Marc, and they remain remarkable value. I mean, remarkably good value, given they've got vineyards from both his grandparents, so both his grandfathers, so Henri Boileau and also Etienne Sauzet. You're getting incredible fruit, old vines. He is making wines in a richer style. I won't deny that. If you like them incredibly clean, and very, very kind of delicate, then Boileau probably isn't for you. But if you like a little bit more swagger, a bit more girth, a bit more richness, then wow, Boileau is knocking it out of the park. And the 19s are phenomenal. And his village Puligny is at 228 a case of 6, and it's fantastic. And another little cheeky top tip is the Montigny Premier Cru is another stunner, and it's even less expensive. So lots to love for us for the first time in a while from a genuine bona fide top of the tree Puligny producer. Okay. So now let's charge on to the Frantin Nuits-Saint-Georges. I think I've pulled it back time-wise, so I can slow down a little bit. We've managed to do 3. Good. Or have we?
Meursault, Tom.
No, we haven't. We haven't done the Meursault. Okay. Right. Okay. Sorry, I was getting. I thought I'd done well there. Okay. So Meursault. That's because I don't even have these in the order as well. So here we go. Gosh, lucky old you and your Meursault. So Meursault. Gosh, if Chassagne was the sort of the younger sibling, Puligny was the steely older brother or sister. Meursault was traditionally it was the riper, waxier, cheesier kind of fruited wine. I don't think you got quite such definition, quite such transparency to the terroir. And then you get producers who come along like Charles Ballot, who we tried the other evening, and of course, like our dear friend, Etienne de Montille and his amazing winemaker, Brian Sieve. And the wine you're trying now is the Musso San Christophe, which is it's not quite a Lieu dit. It's a blend of 2 Lieu dits. So it used to be 3. It used to have Narvaux in it, which we tried the other evening, a straight Lieu dit Narvaux, which is fantastic, just above Gevrey, amazing little vineyard. But this is a blend of Casse-Tête and Petit Charron. So 2 very, very good, again, overperforming Lieu dits. And it's named for this little shrine right on the top of the hill of Meursault, a shrine to San Christophe. And I must confess, when I was out there and trying the wines with Brian, and he mentioned that the wine no longer contained Narvaux, which is one of my absolute favorite Lieu dits, I was a bit disappointed. But I can honestly say trying the San Christophe 19 without the Narvaux, it does not suffer from the lack of that vineyard. In fact, if anything, it's sort of intensified the expression of the other two. And you've got this wonderful kind of succulence, amazing tension. It's a really delicious kind of composite Meursault. So we'd say it's not quite a Lieu-dit, it's a blend of two Lieu-dits, and all the better for it. De Montille, who we'll come on to at the very end as well, for us are one of our flagship growers, and there's simply no other producer in Burgundy who has the same facility with whites as they do with reds. And it's wonderful every year to try with Brian and Etienne and see the consistency across the board. And one of the important things with De Montille is that since Brian came on board and really stamped his signature onto the wines, what we've seen is a much greater kind of freshness and definition, because Brian absolutely insists on picking on the acidity. So for him, when the acidity is where it's meant to be, that's when he picks. Everything else can fall into place. But if you pick overripe fruit, you can't adjust that unless you chaptalize, which frankly, I think Brian was saying he hasn't done that since sort of 2004. No, it was a bit later than that. I can't remember when it was, but it certainly was. It was basically more than 10 years ago. And I think that's what you get with De Montille's wines, is this wonderful, ineffable balance. It's just, they're very easy wines. Brian very self-deprecatingly and quite falsely says they make themselves. They don't, but he is a great example of a hands-off winemaker. He lets the wines express the character of the vineyard. And I think they've had another blinding year in 19. They really have, because they manage the heat very well. They know the important thing is to keep the acidity, to keep the freshness, and to keep the balance. And I think that's what you find here with the Meursault 18, and definitely with the 19. It was absolutely stonking. Really enjoyed it. If you like this wine but want to kind of supercharge things a little bit, then I thoroughly recommend the Premier Cru Prozo from De Montille, which is fantastic. It's just a little bit more complex, a bit more textured, slightly richer, a bit more going on. It's absolutely fantastic. But as a value option, and this will kind of play into our last wine when we come back to Beaune, the Beaune Aigreau, Premier Cru Aigreau white is fabulous. Beaune is one of those appellations which is definitely on the rise, 100%. We could do an entire Challenger session on the vineyards of Beaune. Just today we released Tolobeau, and they have a fantastic pair of Beaune vineyards, in fact. And so it's benefiting massively from the increased temperatures. There's no denying it. It's slightly heavier clay-based soils, and therefore it can take the heat and it can take the drought. So Beaune Aigreau, this little cheeky Premier Cru Beaune, and this is about it's just over 200 pounds a case, and that's an absolute belter. Another sort of dinner party classic to bring out and surprise your guests who have brought much more expensive white Burgundies. Put this on the table and it's worth every single penny and then some. And as an alternative, got to mention it, they tried it on Tuesday night, those of you who joined us, the Meursault Narvaux from Ballot-Mio. In fact, frankly, getting the Musso San Christophe and the Narvaux would be a lovely complement to each other, because, as I mentioned, the San Christophe used to contain Narvaux and now doesn't, and it's the other two vineyards, and then you've got the Narvaux on the side. So, this is a fabulous Lieu-dit just above Gevrey, which Chasse Maurice and many others recognize as being, well above Lieu-dit level, touching, if not definitively, Premier Cru level, and it is superb. And Charles Ballot is one of the absolute top producers of it. Okay. Any comments or questions before we move on to reds? Good. Okay. So now we will do the Nuits-Saint-Georges, Domaine de Clos Frantin 2017. Sorry if you teed up the Gevrey or the Beaune first, but that's what we're going to go. That's what we're going to do. Nuits-Saint-Georges, the challenger's challenger. You know, it's one of the Nuits appellations which is getting better and better. There's no denying it. You know, one could say it was the Pommard of the Côte de Nuits. I think yesterday I said Pommard was the Nuits-Saint-Georges of Beaune, on Tuesday rather. I can't remember. Anyway, the point is that when you compare it to the sort of aristocratic wines of Gevrey Chambertin, the incredible sort of perfume delights of Vosne Romanée, the silky sort of supple style of Chambol, you know, Nuits-Saint-Georges was perhaps it was typically just a little bit more the sort of the gauche you know, sibling who sort of lived in the sticks somewhere and was slightly embarrassing when you brought them out, you know, in polite company. And now I think that's definitely not the case at all. Nuits-Saint-Georges makes some of the most exciting and satisfying Burgundies that you will drink. Once again, I think it's been a beneficiary of climate change. The warmer temperatures flatter Nuits-Saint-Georges, but also you need good winemaking. You really do. Love Luke's comment. Very good. Angus, I'll leave you to reply. Was that the slightly gauche to bring out at dinner parties in front of polite company? I get that. Fair enough.
Well, that's the line, yeah.
Yeah. Domaine de Clos Frantin, who are actually based in Nuits-Saint-Georges. It's a gorgeous maison. They make a cracking benchmark Nuits, and it was my introduction to the estate, and it still impresses me year after year. It's such good wine, such great value. They have vines which average about 40 years old, so you're beginning to get some nice old vine character. They use about 25% whole bunch for this vintage and 30% new oak, which is a fair amount for a village wine. They take it pretty seriously. I'm going to let you guys answer that question on the chat whilst I do the serious bit. But and it's a very good introduction to the Côte de Nuits generally. If you want to understand what, you know, Côte de Nuits Pinot Noir is about, then I think this is a fantastic intro wine. The reason we've sort of kept it to the challengers side of the tasting is, one, because of the great value, but also because Nuits is definitely challenging the more illustrious neighbors of Vosne Romanée, and then, you know, Jebushanbatan down the road, etc., etc. And you know, last but not least, Clos Frantin itself as a domain is definitely challenging the slightly kind of sexier, better known and much more expensive names in Burgundy, just because of their sheer quality. In terms of where else to go around the region, as an upgrade, it would be very remiss of me not to mention de Montille's Nuits-Saint-Georges Premier Cru Autoré, not least because Neil Martin gave it a potential 95-point score, which, you know, Neil is not a generous marker, which is a good thing. You know, that's up there and beyond many considerably more expensive, considerably more illustrious names, but he absolutely loved the Premier Cru Autoré from de Montille. And it's worth drawing to your attention, because whilst we tend to think of de Montille as being predominantly a Côte de Beaune producer with amazing Pommards, Volnays, Cortons, Puny Moroches, Corton Charlemagne, Meursaults, etc., aside from their jewel in their crown, which is the Malconsort von Romanée Premier Cru, where their vines, I mentioned before, they literally touch La Tâche. Their other vineyard, their other Premier Cru, is this Nuits-Saint-Georges Haute Torre. And I bounce year after year between taking it and the last wine that we'll try after the next wine from de Montille. So if you like Nuits-Saint-Georges and you want to get absolutely the best of the best, have a little bit more to spend, then the Haute Torre this year is a particular blinder to look for. As a value option, I think I put in here Jean Tardis Haute Côte de Nuit Cuvée Mailly. So these vineyards are very, very close to Von Romanée. They're just above. And, the Haute Côte is yet another area which is making stunning, stunning wines more and more, and benefiting from climate change once more. And, I think actually, Nathan, you mentioned it the other evening for the first time, and it certainly struck a chord with me, and I've been trotting it out since. 19 is a vintage to go high and go low. There's no need to play safe in 19. Experiment and have fun in 2019. And by that I mean, you can check out from good growers slightly less well-known sites, because they will have performed well. I won't say that 2019 is a homogeneous vintage, but there is quality from top to bottom, and I mean outstanding quality, which is why for this session, for a challengers session, it's particularly relevant. You really can afford to experiment and go out of your comfort zone into kind of vineyard and sites which are less blue chip. At the same time, of course, and for those of you who will come back and join us for Trailblazers next week, it's also a great year to go large, because at the top end there are some incredible wines from the blue chip vineyards too. Good. Let's move on to the Gevrey Chambertin next from Eyre. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention the alternative, by the way. The alternative, Nuits-Saint-Georges, which is utterly brilliant, utterly brilliant, is Edward Delaunay's Nuits-Saint-Georges. And he's based there. That's where the home is. They make 7 or 8 different cuvées. And again, if you want another benchmark Nuits-Saint-Georges, then I would highly, highly recommend the Delaunay and Nuits-Saint-Georges. It's an absolute belter. Yes, there we go. Number 5. Why number 5? We're actually drinking at number 5. That was entirely accidental. I didn't plan that. Okay, where are we? So Eyre. Do check out the alternative Nuits-Saint-Georges. That Delaunay was an absolute stunner, I have to say. And again, we've just asked today for a load of it in magnums, because I think it's a brilliant, brilliant dinner party red for 3 or 4 years down the line. Gevrey Chambertin and Eyre. Great producer, great woman. Just this week won the RVF, Negociant of the Year. So this is like the Michelin equivalent for winemaking in France. She picked up a 2nd star, hence the Michelin comparison at the end of December, which really starts to put her into the upper echelons. And she was announced as the Negociant of the Year. So wonderful Jane, a great friend, great winemaker, great ambassador for Pinot Noir, both in Australia and in Burgundy. Her wines are on a new trajectory, I think, since probably 18. They're still very pretty, very charming, very perfumed, very supple, lovely poise and delicacy and finesse, but they've just put on a bit of weight. They've got broader shoulders now. And, with 18 and now 19, you know, you've got some seriously, you know, Burgundies that are in contention with the very best. I thought I would read you Jancis Robinson's review of her 19 Jebushanbatan, because frankly, it sums it up far better than I could. So Jancis wrote, from two sought-after plots of land, comme dessous, just in front of the Château de Chambertin, and en champ, a little further up the slope in front of the Premier Cru Champeau. The vines are between 35 and 55 years old, 30% whole bunch, 17% new barrels, light filtration, 1,600 bottles and 25 magnums made. So far, so fact cheese. Pretty deep crimson, sumptuously sweet, spicy nose with lovely structure and great balance between sweetness and acidity. I'm really looking forward to the Gevrey Premier Cru Corbeau now, if it's to be better than this. There's quite a bit of fine tannin. Gosh, this is good. Now, you know, Jancis is not necessarily known for being, you know, overly flamboyant in her praise of wines. So I think this is about as close as you get to ecstasy, frankly. And you know, there's no denying the 19 is stunning wine. It really is, and Jane deserves all the plaudits that she's getting from Jancis and Jasper and Neil Martin and all the critics and all the French critics too. She's really making stunning, supple wines, which you can drink almost immediately once they're shipped, but it's kind of worth hanging on to them to see how they age. I had the 14 that we're drinking this evening for a tasting towards the back end of last year in whole bottle, and it just, I remember how well it showed 2 nights after. It didn't have much left, to be fair, but you know, it's a wine which definitely ages and develops beautifully. So yeah, an awful lot to be said for Jane and her wines. Just as a quick recap for those who haven't heard me mention it before, you know, Jane's backstory is fascinating. She was originally a hairdresser based in Melbourne. One of the husband of one of her main clients was a famous winemaker. Jane wanted to get into winemaking. He sort of facilitated her introduction to various top winemakers. She did stages all around Australia and New Zealand, some great producers like Atarangi in New Zealand, like Colin, and then over in Germany, and really found her métier in Burgundy, working with the likes of Dominique Lafont, and then moved out to Burgundy and has started her micro-negociant business. You know, is now making exceptional wines and is clearly being recognized as such. And we're delighted to be working with her. In terms of an upgrade from this, well, Jancis mentioned her Corbeau, and indeed went on to say, having tasted the Corbeau, this is the best 2019 Burgundy I've tried in London. So I can't really say a great deal more than that. The parcel of Premier Cru Corbeau that Jane works is right next to, I mean, it borders, the vines touch Mazy Chambertin Grand Cru. So it's a fabulous wine, and it was for me her top wine this year. We've sold an absolute shed load of it, I have to say, virtually all gone, helped clearly by the Jancis review, but I did manage to plead and beg Jane to give us another, I think we got 6 more cases yesterday, so hurry before Purple Pages buy them all up, basically. As a value option, wow, I mean, well, we've got to go with Jane's Côte de Nuit Village, which is incredible. And you know, to keep the praise rolling in, this was one of Jasper Maurice's 5-star wines, as in completely and utterly outperforms its relatively modest appellation. So I think he awarded it 90 points, but then gave it 5 stars. You know, which you know, it has to be something pretty damn special to be at that sort of level. So you know, if you fancy a bit of the Gevrey, you know, that can be, the Gevrey can be your sort of Saturday night wine. The Nuits-Saint-Georges could be your kitchen supper red at a mere £144 a case, and then maybe a case of Corbeau for you know, high days and holidays. As an alternative, and it's a bit more expensive, but it's so delicious and it's so sexy. We've got to crowbar it in somewhere. Jean Tardis, Gevrey, Chambertin, Chambertin, old vines, beautiful site. Another great one made by Charles Magnon, an amazing little site. And that's incredibly delicious. That is a Gevrey Chambertin made by a Beaune Romanée producer. And I know it's a favorite of Nathan's. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's much sexier than most most Gevrey Chambertins have a right to be. More supple, more delicate. It's just absolutely delicious. Whew. So, last but not least, let's move on to the Beaune Greves. Going to have a pretzel whilst you all charge your glasses. I had this at Christmas. The 15, and it's rather young. I know we're finishing with it, and therefore it should be the most. Mature. But it's still quite young. So if you've got a decent sized glass, and I hope you do, give it an open, whirl it around, please, because this is an extraordinarily rich, powerful, and structured wine. And 15 was, I think 15 was their best vintage up until 18 and 19. And I love this wine. This is the one wine. No, not the one wine. This is one of the dozen or so wines I take every single year for myself. And it's quite a special vineyard. I mentioned the Beaune Aigreau from de Montille as a value option previously, and the Beaune Greves here deserves its own category. It's pretty special. Brian refers to it as a Petit Pommard Premier Cru, and you've got here this very iron-rich soil, but a lot of limestone there as well. And it's very, very old vines. 2/3 of the vines are between 60 and 80 years old. So you're getting this wonderful combination of interesting minerally soils, very old vines, penetrating deep. Brian does about 50% whole bunch here in 19. And overall, I think there's about 1/3 new oak, 25% new oak. Can't remember, something like that. Anyway, the point is, you've got a serious long-term wine here with the 15. The idea that 2015 was a sort of a wham bam, thank you ma'am, very ripe, rich, forward drinking solar year is not borne out when you try a wine like this, because the structure is all there. And I think 15 is very much like 19 in that regard, although the 19 is a little lighter on its feet, a little bit fresher, a touch more supple, a bit more sophisticated. But yeah, Beaune Greves is definitely a keeper and one to watch. It's for me, I mean, you should be getting some of that sort of kind of plum skin, blood orange peel character on the nose. Brilliant, Luke. Very good. Yeah, it's what else can I say about it without nothing about Angus? Slightly rustic, a little bit, no, whatever. Anyway, no, but it's definitely a wine which outdrinks its appellation, but it's also one which you need to keep. It's a keeper. And I think that I've tried vintages, sort of, for example, the 01, the 02, and they last incredibly well. You can treat them like a pommard, but for less than 2/3 the price. So really serious Burgundy. If you want to upgrade, then I think you need to start looking seriously at de Montille's incredible Volnay holdings. You've got the Brouillard, which in 2020, the entire allocation has been made as a kosher cuvee, which we have done with de Montille, which is rather exciting. More about that if you're interested. It's worth a moment of your time. But the Champon Premier Cru is a beautiful Volnay, and it sort of takes this Beaune character but adds a little bit more kind of supple elegance, a more floral character. It's a little bit more charming, shall we say, and that is absolutely stunning. As a value option, I think you really can't go wrong with the Pommard L'Écrat. So the L'Écrat is a Lieu dit, and it's a fabulous house red Pommard. That's at about sort of £220 a case, and that's, I know there's a couple of people on this call and a few who couldn't make it. For them, that's their sort of house Beaune red, and it's absolutely stunningly good. Maybe a touch softer than the Beaune Greves, not quite as serious, a bit more immediate. It's a pretty exciting kit. And then as an alternative, I was racking my brains for something appropriate, and then I suddenly came up with something which I think fits brilliantly, and that is Jane Eyre's Chassagne-Montrachet Red Premier Cru Bondu. So this is her, as she calls it, her monopole. And this is this tiny little, I think it's what, 0.2 or 3 hectares of vines in the middle of what is otherwise planted to Chardonnay. It's just over the track from Montrachet, Grand Cru, and yet it's planted to Pinot Noirs, but it's a very similar soil type to Montrachet, and, you know, super old vines, and it's a stunning, complex, earthy, spicy, rich kind of, there's, you know, that sort of soy, tamarind, and a bit of tapenade character, lots of earth, and it's an absolute superstar of a wine, very unusual, and
Tom
the last vintage that she'll make because she's lost the contract for the vine. So it's kind of a buy it now or never see it again opportunity.
She's lost the contract for the Bondu.
Yeah, this is it.
We made it 2 vintages.
2 vintages, that's it.
It's just a few. So most of us will know, will know this as Chassagne-Montrachet as white, but it used to be about a third of the Chassagne-Montrachet was red. Now less, because people have been grubbing up Pinot Noir and replacing it with Chardonnay. But this Bondu we tasted last year, vintage 2018, and I immediately bought, snapped up a case for myself and brought some over for the club. And it's a tremendous wine. When you think about red Chassagne-Montrachet, you normally think of ocean spray, cranberry juice sort of stuff. This is nothing like it. It's, as Tom said, earthy, somber, deep, complex.
Yeah, really very exciting. So yes, so there we go. Look at that. I am done with my monologue with 30 seconds to spare. I'm getting good at this.
All you need to do is get it in the right order, and then we'll be fine.
There we go. That. But then, I like the frisson of excitement that maybe people end up drinking the wrong wine and
No, I don't, because I'm in charge of putting them in order
and end up tasting plum skins when we're actually talking about cherries. But I always love that I think it was Gavin Quinney, who some of you will know, who's a wonderful winemaker, good friend, who makes Chateau Beaune in Bordeaux, who said he hates adding tasting notes to wines because he says it's ridiculous, because what is it? It was, one man's cherries is another man's plums. Yes. So it's all very personal when you do tasting notes.
Tom, you may not have picked this up, but somebody's asked me whether there's any problem with the last sample, the de Montille Beaune Greves. My sample is perfect, but it's quite different from the 2 other reds we've had, in that it's got much more beef to it. It's much more tannic, and it's got a tiny touch of volatile acidity. So it's got sort of, it's 2015. It is 2015 sample.
Yeah.
So it's not mature yet, but it's got what we call secondary sort of flavors of maturation. So it's not dumb at the moment, but it's a little bit slightly disassociated, I'd say, with the tannins being quite prominent, bit of VA, and the fruit sinking to the back a bit. But I don't get anything wrong with this.
No, as I mentioned, I actually had the 15 at Christmas, and it was really quite closed, and it's rather hard to aerate one of these small flasks. But if you've got any left in the glass, it's probably worth leaving for a bit and just letting some air get into it, because it is going through maybe a slightly dumb phase. But you know, when it blossoms, you've got to remember, this is one of the challenges with Burgundy is it sort of goes through waves, frankly, you know, where you normally find Burgundy is often surprisingly accessible within the first year of being bottled. You know, there's plenty of fruit there, things, especially the way wines are made today, more modern winemaking, you know, with extended drinking windows, softer, better tannin management, etc. That, you know, they're very accessible early. But the best Burgundies invariably do close down. You know, there's a period where they just kind of, the tannic structure just kind of folds in over the fruit, and that can last for 2 or 3 or more years. And then kind of like, you know, petals in spring, they sort of unfurl and release the fruit once again. So you might find that the Beaune Greves is just in a slightly dumb closed phase right now. But I promise you, when it opens up, it's well worth it. It's well worth it. So some comments or questions as well. I'm just looking on the chat here if I've missed anything. Why are plots so big in Beaune compared to others, from David? David, I'm going to be honest here. I'm not entirely sure, but I would hazard a guess. That it's quite a large area, and it hasn't been as hotly contested by family members over the years, so that if you look at the land prices of Beaune vineyards by comparison to Volnay or Pommard or Corton, or certainly anything when we get onto the Côte Nuit, there hasn't been quite the same issue around the division of the spoils from generation to generation. You know, the vineyards have largely remained in family holdings, whereas, you know, when you look at other more illustrious Burgundy appellations, you know, when you're talking about land prices that can be 10 million euros a hectare to 20 to 25 million euros a hectare, you know, anyone who feels they've got a claim on a tiny bit of that is going to stake it, and they're going to want to own it. So you tend to see much more fractionalization of Burgundy vineyards where the land prices are greater. So I think Beaune, you know, fly slightly under the radar a bit, and those family members who are part of a domain who inherit are less likely to want to bother trying to sell their bit of it in order to realize some cash, because it's not worth as much. As I said, that's a little bit of a guess, but it's not entirely unfair, I don't think.
I'd say, Tom, in the old days, most of us wouldn't really look at Beaune as a place to, as an appellation to buy from. We'd look at it as the place to stay.
Yeah, exactly. It's where the restaurants are. Beaune's where the restaurants are.
But I think that
around the corner. Yeah.
I think that's really changed now, and particularly as the prices have got so high in some of the other areas, that actually Beaune, the technical quality of winemaking, improved wine production, things like the Beaune Greves we've just had, or as you said, some of the other ones, the white, the Clos de Mouche from is it Pavillon? From Domaine de Pavillon, the white Clos de Mouche is superb. The Beaune Sizzy from de Montille as well. There's just an awful lot going on there now.
Yeah, and you know, back to that sort of notion of go high, go low in 19. Other regions like that, you know, Chory-le-Beaune, Alos Corton, Savigny-le-Beaune, these sort of, you know, the sort of ugly ducklings of Burgundy appellations for many years have shone in 2019. A light has quite literally shone on them, and it's definitely worth looking at them. You know, if you're more bothered by what's in the glass than what's on the label, which I hope, frankly, all of you are, then these are appellations which it behooves you to pay closer attention to, because they have massively overperformed in 2019. They really have, and they have again, by the way, in 2020. So it's going to be, yeah, see you all same time next year for 2020. But yeah, there's some really good wines from these slightly under the radar appellations.
Tom, I had a question.
Ollie, yes.
Yes. So just as you were mentioning 2020, so I know that obviously in 2019 the yields were a lot down on previous years, particularly the 2018, 20 to 35%, depending on the wine and the area. In 2020, I know we saw a similar sort of sunny summer, but what about the yields? What are we looking at?
So firstly, 19 was a considerably smaller vintage than 18, but 18 was a bumper crop. So I think you've got to look at things in context. Burgundy has had a string of pretty small vintages. I think they've lost an entire vintage in the last 5 years, if that makes sense. With probably the nadir being 2016, where some vineyards lost up to 80%. So due to the appalling and unexpected frosts in the wrong places. So 19 is down. The thing about 19 to bear in mind is it's down on 18 by about 20 to 30%, which makes it about 10% down on what we would consider to be the new normal in Burgundy. So it is down, but it's not dramatically down. The key thing with 19 and then 20 is that it's that the reason that 19 and 20 are down are not because of physiological issues with the grapes. It wasn't because of rot or frost or hail or flies, that nasty fly that kind of did its damage in 16 and in 2012. It's because of drought. So what you're getting is a similar number of grapes. You're actually getting a reasonably similar yield. The difference is they're smaller grapes. There's less juice in the grapes. So you're getting a concentration in the wines, which is actually very attractive. It leads to great quality, but it does lead to a bit of a drop. So yeah, yields in 2020, because 2020 I think it was just about the earliest harvest on record. It's no worse than 19, but it does vary from appellation to appellation. So it's definitely another small harvest. It's reasonable yielding fruit, but low yielding juice. And it was picked on average a little bit earlier, purely to preserve freshness and to prevent dehydration.
Tom, can I chip in a couple of extra observations there? The autumn and winter of 2019-20 was very dry, so the water table didn't get topped up, and then the drought in the summer of 20 meant, as Tom said, that you've got grapes with just more intense grapes with less plumpness to them, less rain during the summer. The other thing that Tom and I have noticed is we think some of the producers, not all of them, are getting a bit more canny and like the Bordelais in respect that they seem to be holding some wine back. And the Bordelais are past masters at this, at telling you there's less wine, but they've actually just decided to keep it an extra couple of years till it's ready to sell for a higher price in Asia. And I've got a feeling from some of the pictures I've seen and some of the vats that you saw, Tom, that there are a couple of producers who are going, désolé, it's 40% less production, but actually it's 20% less, but they're holding on to a bit more to sell later.
Yeah.
Can I just say, I have to leave now. This was a very, very informative wine tasting. Thoroughly enjoyed it, but I have to go to Zoom for my tennis club's Zoom AGM in 5 minutes. So thank you very much. We thoroughly enjoyed the wine and look forward to joining you again in the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Stephen. That's very kind. Brilliant. Excellent.
Thank you.
only people like Graham and Tim were as, you know, effusive and sort of generally, you know, thankful for all the effort we made. I'm glad that was one of the more you know, polite gestures you could have made there, Tim. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah. No, great to see you all. Thanks all for coming. Yeah, it's a fascinating vintage 19. There's lots to love. More tastings to come. One thing I should mention is that Charlie and I are working at the moment on doing some grower events as well, coming up in February, where we will have guest growers joining us. That's not an excuse not to put your allocations in now, but just to let you know that we've got some real experts coming to talk to you in the coming weeks, and to give you a bit of a focus on specific producers. So yeah, do look out for those. Do keep your emails coming, your comments coming, etc., etc. You know, if there's anything we can help with on your Burgundy buying front, then you know we are. And for those who have yet to sign up for next week's Trailblazers event, I know there's people here who were at the previous week's one, so you're welcome to come again, of course. But if you'd like to try some of the absolute top of the tree Burgundies we have to offer, then please do join us. And apart from that, thanks very much and enjoy your evening.
Good night, everybody.